The first thing people noticed about James Mitchell wasn't his worn combat boots or the faded army jacket that had seen better days. It wasn't even the cardboard sign propped against his backpack that read veteran. Anything helps. God bless. What people noticed most was how they didn't notice him at all. 3 years on the streets of Philadelphia had taught James that invisibility was a survival skill. The fewer eyes that landed on you, the fewer problems you encountered. He'd chosen a spot near the 30th Street station, where the constant flow of commuters created a rhythm he could disappear into. Morning rush, afternoon lull, evening chaos. Then the quiet hours when the city finally exhaled. It was a Tuesday morning in late November when everything changed. The kind of morning where the cold didn't just touch your skin. It lived in your bones. James had been awake since 4, unable to sleep through the shivers that racked his body despite the 3 layers of clothing and the thin sleeping bag that had seen him through 2 winters already. The temperature had dropped to 28 degrees overnight, and the wind off the Schuylkill River cut through the concrete canyon of the city like a blade. By 6:30, the commuters started arriving. James watched them from his corner, a parade of old coats and leather briefcases, everyone moving with purpose toward trains and taxis and the warm offices that awaited them. He wasn't panhandling, not yet. The morning crowd was always in too much of a hurry, too focused on being late or making it on time. The afternoon crowd was better, when people's shoulders had relaxed a little, when guilt or compassion or simple human decency made them reach into their pockets. He was adjusting his cardboard sign when he saw it. A black leather wallet, partially hidden beneath the bench at the bus stop 10 feet away. For a moment, James didn't move. He'd learned to be cautious about anything that seemed too easy, too convenient. The streets taught you that lesson fast. But as he watched, commuters rushed past the wallet without seeing it, their eyes fixed on phones or the arriving buses. James pushed himself up from his sitting position, his knees protesting the cold and the hard concrete they'd rested on all night. He walked slowly to the bench, glancing around to see if anyone was frantically searching their pockets, retracing their steps with that particular panic of someone who just realized something valuable was missing. But everyone kept moving, kept rushing, kept living their lives in fast forward while he played in slow motion. He picked up the wallet. It was heavy, expensive, the kind of leather that probably cost more than James had held in his hands in 3 years. He opened it carefully, and his breath caught. There had to be at least $800 in cash, neatly organized in the billfold. Credit cards, Amex, Visa, something platinum he didn't recognize. A driver's license with the name Richard Crawford, age 47, with an address in Rittenhouse Square. The photo showed a clean-cut man with graying temples and the kind of confident expression that came from never having to worry about where your next meal would come from. James's hands trembled, and it wasn't entirely from the cold. $800. That was 2 months in a cheap motel. That was warm showers and hot meals and maybe, just maybe, enough stability to start putting the pieces of his life back together. He could cash out the cards at any number of places he knew, places that didn't ask questions. He could disappear into the anonymous machinery of the city's underground economy and emerge somewhere else, someone else with a chance at starting over. He stood there for what felt like an hour but was probably only minutes, the wallet heavy in his hands, heavier with possibility and temptation. Around him, the city continued its morning symphony. Buses hissing to stops, conversations overlapping, someone's phone ringing with a melody that cost 99 cents to download, but might as well have been from another planet. Then James thought about his father. Thomas Mitchell, Sergeant First Class, retired. A man who'd served 22 years in the Army and had raised his son with a code so simple it could fit on a dog tag. Do the right thing, especially when no one's watching. His father had been gone 5 years now, but James could still hear his voice, steady and certain, the way it had sounded when James was 10 years old and had stolen a candy bar from the corner store. It ain't about what you can get away with, son. It's about who you are when nobody knows your name. James closed his eyes, took a deep breath of the cold November air, and made his decision. He walked back to his spot, tucked the wallet safely in his inner jacket pocket, and sat down to wait. Someone would come looking for it. Someone always did. The first hour passed slowly. James watched every person who approached the bus stop with anticipation, looking for signs of distress or searching. A few people glanced his way, the brief, uncomfortable glance that people gave homeless veterans, that mixture of pity and guilt and relief that it wasn't them sitting on the cold concrete. But no one stopped. No one asked. By 8 o'clock, James's fingers had gone numb despite the fingerless gloves he wore. He flexed them periodically, trying to keep the blood flowing. A woman in a burgundy coat stopped near him, searching through her purse with increasing frustration. James sat up straighter. "Excuse me, ma'am? Did you lose something?" She looked at him with surprise, as if she hadn't realized he could speak. "My phone. I thought I had it, but..." She trailed off, pulling out her phone from a side pocket and laughing with relief. "Never mind. Found it." She hurried away without another word. 9 o'clock came and went. The morning rush had ended, leaving behind the slower rhythm of mid-morning travelers. James's stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. A half-eaten sandwich someone had left on a bench in Rittenhouse Square, still wrapped enough to be safe. The cash in the wallet represented more meals than he could count, but the thought of spending even $1 felt like crossing a line he couldn't cross. At 9:45, a black town car pulled up to the curb near the bus stop. The driver got out, looked around with obvious purpose, then opened the rear door. A man emerged, and even from a distance, James recognized him from the driver's license photo. Richard Crawford looked different in person. More tired, more human. His suit probably cost what James used to make in a month, back when he had a job, back when he had a life that included things like monthly income and tax returns. Richard spoke urgently to the driver, gesturing at the bus stop, then began a systematic search of the area. He checked under the bench, behind the trash can, even asked a few passing commuters if they'd seen a wallet. His movements grew more agitated with each passing minute. James watched him for a moment, noting the way Richard's shoulders tensed, the way he kept running his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration and worry that transcended economic class. James stood up slowly, pulled the wallet from his jacket, and walked toward Richard. The distance between his corner and the bus stop was maybe 30 feet, but it felt like crossing between two different worlds. Richard was on his phone now, his back to James, speaking in clipped, professional tones about canceling credit cards. "Excuse me," James said quietly. "Are you Richard Crawford?" Richard spun around, his eyes immediately going to the wallet in James's hands. For a second, something flashed across his face. Fear, maybe, or suspicion. James was suddenly aware of how he must look. Unshaven, hair too long, clothes that had been slept in because they were slept in. "That's mine," Richard said, his voice careful, controlled. "Where did you find it?" "Under the bench. About 3 hours ago." James held out the wallet. "Everything's there. I didn't touch anything." Richard took the wallet, opened it, and quickly checked the contents. James saw the moment the tension left his shoulders, saw relief flood his features. 3 hours? You've been waiting here for 3 hours. Figured you'd come back for it eventually. Most people do. Richard stared at him for a long moment, and James shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. He'd done the right thing. He could leave now, go back to his corner, resume the invisible existence that was his life. But Richard's expression had changed to something James couldn't quite read. "You're military," Richard said suddenly. It wasn't a question. James blinked in surprise. "How did you—" "The jacket, the way you stand, and—" Richard gestured vaguely. "I can just tell." "What branch?" "Army, infantry. Did 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan." Richard's face shifted again, this time to something like recognition. 3rd Infantry Division? Now it was James's turn to stare. 2nd Brigade Combat Team. "How did you know that?" "Because I was in the 3rd Infantry, 1st Brigade." Richard's voice had softened. "What years were you in Iraq?" "First tour was 2005 to 2006. The second was 2008. I was there in 2005. We provided support for your brigade during the Battle of Ramadi." Richard shook his head slowly, as if processing an impossible coincidence. "I remember the 2nd Brigade. You guys held the line when things got worse." The memories came flooding back, unbidden and sharp. The heat that made your gear feel like it was melting into your skin. The constant awareness of danger, the way every piece of trash on the roadside could be an IED. The brothers he'd served with, some who'd come home, some who'd stayed behind in the sand. James felt something tighten in his chest. "Yeah," he managed. "We held the line." They stood in silence for a moment, 2 men connected by a shared history that most people couldn't understand. The morning cold, the busy street, the fact that one of them wore a $1,000 suit while the other wore 3-day-old clothes. None of it seemed to matter at that moment. "What's your name?" Richard asked. "James. James Mitchell." "James? I'm Richard Crawford." "And I—" He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "I need to know. Why did you wait? Why didn't you just take the money and go?" "I'm not judging. I'm genuinely asking. Most people would have." James thought about his father again, about the code that had been drilled into him since childhood and reinforced through years of military service. "Because that's not who I am," he said simply. "And because you earned your money. I didn't. Would have felt like stealing from a brother." Richard's eyes widened slightly at the last word. Then, without warning, he extended his hand. James hesitated for only a second before shaking it. Richard's grip was firm, warm, the handshake of equals despite the obvious disparity in their circumstances. "How long have you been out here, James?" 3 years, give or take." "And before that?" The question opened doors James usually kept locked. But something about Richard's genuine interest, about the fact that he was still standing here asking questions instead of jumping back into his town car and driving away to his comfortable life, it made James answer honestly. "I came back from my last deployment in 2012. Everything was different. I was different. Had nightmares, couldn't hold down a job, couldn't connect with people who hadn't been there. My wife, ex-wife now, she tried, but I was drowning and I pulled her down with me. Eventually she left, took our daughter. Can't blame her. I started drinking to sleep, lost my job as a mechanic, lost my apartment. I ended up here." Richard listened without interrupting, his expression serious and attentive. When James finished, Richard was quiet for a moment, then said, "I had nightmares too. Still do sometimes. The difference between us isn't that you're weak or I'm strong. The difference is I had a support system that caught me when I fell. Had family money, had connections, had people who knew how to navigate the VA system. You didn't have that. That's just how it is," James said, trying to keep the bitterness out of his voice. Some guys make it back, some don't. That's bullshit, Richard said bluntly. You served your country. You held the line like you said. You should have come back to a country that held the line for you. The fact that you didn't, that's on us, not on you. James didn't know what to say to that. He'd spent 3 years telling himself a story about his own failures, his own weaknesses. Hearing someone, especially someone who'd been there, who understood, say it differently made something crack in the wall he'd built around himself. Richard pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then looked back at James. I run a security consulting firm, Crawford Security Solutions. We work with corporations, high-net-worth individuals, provide risk assessment and protection services. It's a good company. We do honest work. James nodded, not sure where this was going. I need people I can trust, people with real-world experience, people who understand discipline and loyalty and doing the right thing even when it's hard. People like you. Richard paused. I'm offering you a job, James, if you want it. The words hung in the cold November air between them. James felt like he'd been sucker punched. A job. After 3 years of nothing, of being invisible, of being less than nothing in the eyes of most people who passed by. A job. I can't. James struggled to find words. Look at me. I haven't showered in a week. I don't have an address. I don't even have a phone. Those are logistics. We can solve logistics. Richard's voice was firm, certain. What I need to know is if you're willing to try, if you're willing to show up and do the work. Because I saw who you are this morning, James. You could have taken that wallet and disappeared. You had every reason to, every justification. But you didn't. You waited in the freezing cold for 3 hours to do the right thing. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. James felt his throat tighten. He'd spent so long believing he was worthless, believing he deserved this life of cold concrete and hunger and invisibility. Hearing someone see value in him, see potential, it was almost too much to process. I'm willing to try, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I don't know if I can do it. Don't know if I'm too broken. But I'm willing to try. Richard smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his executive face into something warmer, more human. That's all anyone can ask. Come on, let's get you somewhere warm, get some food in you, and we'll start figuring this out. If you're enjoying this story so far, please subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think will happen next. James followed Richard to the town car in a daze. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, opened the door without hesitation or judgment. James hesitated at the threshold, suddenly aware of how he must smell of the dirt ground into his clothes. It's okay, Richard said gently. Get in. We'll get you cleaned up. The car's interior was warm, blessedly, impossibly warm. James sank into the leather seat and had to fight back tears. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been this comfortable, this warm. The simple act of sitting in a heated car felt like a luxury beyond measure. Richard made several phone calls as they drove, his tone brisk and professional. James caught fragments. Clear my schedule for the day. Get a room ready at the Hampton. Yes, I need it now, not this afternoon. Between calls, Richard asked James questions about his military service, his skills as a mechanic, what he liked to do before everything fell apart. James found himself talking more than he had in months, maybe years. Richard didn't interrupt or judge. He just listened. They pulled up to a Hampton Inn in Center City. Richard led James through the lobby, ignoring the curious and disapproving looks from other guests, and up to a room on the 3rd floor. It was simple, clean, functional, and to James it looked like a palace. Take your time, Richard said, gesturing to the bathroom. Shower, clean up, Rest if you need to. I'm gonna run out and get you some clothes, some essentials. What size are you? James told him, still feeling like he was in a dream he might wake from at any moment. After Richard left, James stood in the middle of the hotel room, overwhelmed. He walked to the window and looked out at the city below, at the people rushing past on the sidewalks. Just this morning, he'd been one of the invisible ones. Now he stood in a warm room, with a shower waiting and the promise of clean clothes and a job. A job, hanging in the air like a miracle he didn't deserve but desperately needed. The shower was everything he'd fantasized about during 3 years of washing up in public restrooms and shelters. Hot water that didn't run out after 30 seconds. Soap that didn't come from a dispenser. Privacy. James stood under the spray until his skin turned pink, washing away layers of dirt and cold in desperation. He watched the water swirl down the drain and imagined it carrying away pieces of the person he'd been forced to become on the streets. When he emerged, wrapped in a towel that was clean and soft, he found Richard had returned. The bed was covered with shopping bags from Target and a nearby department store. Jeans, shirts, underwear, socks, a warm winter coat, toiletries, a cheap phone still in its packaging, even a pair of work boots that looked sturdy and new. I guessed on some sizes, Richard said, unpacking the bags. We can exchange anything that doesn't fit. There's also... He pulled out a smaller bag. A trimmer, razor, everything you need if you want to clean up your hair and beard. No pressure either way, just options. James touched the clothes with tentative fingers, still half convinced this would evaporate. Richard, this is too much. I can't. You can and you will, Richard interrupted firmly. Consider it an advance on your salary, which we need to discuss. He sat down in the desk chair while James perched on the edge of the bed, still wrapped in the towel. I'm starting you at $45,000 a year. That's entry-level for my company, but there's room for growth. Health insurance kicks in after 90 days. I need you to start next Monday, which gives us a week to get you set up. We'll work on getting you an apartment, probably something near our office in the Northeast. Nothing fancy, but clean and safe. We'll need to get you an ID if yours has expired. Get you registered with the VA for benefits you should have been receiving all along. James's head was spinning. $45,000. That was more than he'd made as a mechanic, more than he'd dared to dream about during the 3 years of surviving on whatever people dropped in his cup. What would I be doing? What's the job? Security assessment, initially. We'll train you on our protocols and systems. Eventually, I see you moving into client relations, meeting with potential clients, understanding their needs, designing security solutions. Your military experience gives you credibility that most security consultants don't have. And frankly, after what you did this morning, I know you have integrity. That matters more than technical skills, which we can teach. I don't know what to say, James managed. His voice cracked. I don't. Why are you doing this? Really? Richard was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Because I could have been you, James. If things had been different, if I'd come home to nothing instead of something, if the nightmares had been just a little bit worse or the support system just a little bit weaker, I could have been you. And because... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Because you reminded me this morning what honor looks like. I've been running a successful company for 10 years. I've made a lot of money, earned a lot of respect in the industry. But somewhere along the way, I think I forgot what it meant to do the right thing when it cost you something. You remembered. You lived it. That's worth more than any resume. They sat in silence for a moment, Two veterans separated by circumstance but connected by something deeper than economics or social standing. Finally, James spoke. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Richard said. "Now get dressed. I'm taking you to lunch, and then we're going to start putting your life back together. One step at a time." The next few days passed in a blur of activity that left James exhausted but hopeful in a way he hadn't felt in years. Richard was true to his word, methodically addressing each obstacle that stood between James and stability. They went to the DMV and got James a new driver's license. They visited the VA office, where a patient counselor helped James register for healthcare and mental health services he should have been receiving all along. They opened a bank account, the first James had owned in 3 years. Richard also introduced James to his family. His wife, Catherine, was a warm woman in her mid-40s who worked as a nurse at Pennsylvania Hospital. She greeted James without judgment, treating him like any other dinner guest in their Rittenhouse Square townhouse. Their 2 children, a college-age daughter named Emma and a high school son named Michael, were polite and curious, asking James questions about his military service with genuine interest. Sitting at their dinner table, eating Catherine's homemade lasagna, James felt something he'd almost forgotten. The sensation of being part of something, of belonging somewhere, of being seen as a person instead of a problem. Emma asked him about Afghanistan, and James found himself sharing stories he'd kept locked away for years. Michael wanted to know about the weapon systems James had trained on. Catherine listened with the attentive compassion of someone who'd heard plenty of difficult stories in her work at the hospital. "You're always welcome here," Catherine told James as he was leaving that night. "I mean that. If you need anything, if you're struggling, if you just need to talk, call us. You're not alone anymore." James had to turn away to hide the tears that threatened. 3 years of being alone, of being invisible, and now this family was opening their door to him like it was the most natural thing in the world. By Friday, a week after finding the wallet, James had keys to a small studio apartment in Northeast Philadelphia. It was in a building that had seen better days, with thin walls and a radiator that clanked. But it was his. He had furniture, donated items Richard had arranged through a veterans charity. He had dishes, a bed, and a small TV. He had an address, place to call home. Sunday night, James couldn't sleep. Not from nightmares this time, but from anticipation mixed with terror. Tomorrow he will start his new job. Tomorrow he would walk into an office where people expected something from him, where he would have responsibilities and tasks and a reason to wake up beyond simple survival. The prospect was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. What if he couldn't do it? What if the months and years on the streets had broken something in him that couldn't be fixed? What if he let Richard down, proved that the faith placed in him was misguided? But then James thought about that moment at the bus stop, about holding Richard's wallet in his hands and choosing integrity over desperation. If he could make that choice in his lowest moment, maybe, just maybe, he could face the challenges ahead. Monday morning arrived with the sharp clarity of a new beginning. James woke up at 5, a habit from his military days that homelessness hadn't broken. He showered, shaved, and dressed carefully in the professional clothes Richard had helped him pick out: khaki pants, a button-down shirt, the warm coat that would protect him from the December cold that had arrived over the weekend. He took the bus to the office, watching Philadelphia wake up around him. The commuters who boarded at each stop looked different to him now. He wasn't separate from them anymore, wasn't invisible. He was one of them again. Someone with somewhere to be, something to do, a purpose beyond surviving another day. Crawford Security Solutions occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated building in the Spring Garden area. The lobby was modern and professional, with the company logo, a shield intersected by a diagonal line, mounted on the wall in brushed steel. James announced himself to the receptionist, a young woman named Sarah who smiled warmly and said, "Mr. Crawford is expecting you. He's very excited you're here." Richard met James at the door to his office, shaking his hand firmly. "Ready for your first day?" "As ready as I'll ever be," James admitted. "Good. Come on. I'll show you around and introduce you to the team." The office was smaller than James had imagined, maybe 20 employees in total. Richard introduced him to each one, explaining James's role and background. Some people seemed curious, some reserved, but no one treated him with the pity or disgust he'd become accustomed to on the streets. They treated him like a colleague, a new member of the team. His direct supervisor was a former Marine named Marcus Rodriguez, a compact man in his 50s with a firm handshake and an assessing gaze. "Richard told me what you did," Marcus said after the introductions. "Finding that wallet, waiting all morning. That takes character. Character is what this company is built on, so you're gonna fit in just fine." The first week was overwhelming. James had to learn new software systems, memorize protocols, understand the specific security concerns of different types of clients. His brain, dulled by years of focusing only on immediate survival, struggled to retain all the information being thrown at him. He went home each night exhausted, his head pounding from the effort of learning and adapting. But he showed up every day, on time, prepared, willing to ask questions when he didn't understand something. Marcus was patient, breaking down complex concepts into manageable pieces. The other team members offered help without making James feel incompetent. Slowly, steadily, things began to click. By the end of his second week, James was assigned to his first real project, conducting a security assessment for a small law firm downtown. He would be shadowing Marcus, observing and learning, but the fact that Richard trusted him enough to put him in front of a client meant everything. The law firm visit went better than James had dared hope. He watched Marcus work, noting how he asked questions, how he assessed vulnerabilities, how he presented solutions in terms of risk management rather than fear. During the walkthrough of the building, James noticed something Marcus had missed: a basement access point that wasn't on the building's floor plan but was visible from the street level. His military training in assessing tactical entry points had kicked in automatically. "Good catch," Marcus said, genuinely impressed. "That's exactly the kind of detail-oriented thinking we need. Make a note of it for the report." That evening, Richard called James into his office. "Marcus gave me a rundown of the law firm visit. He said you did excellent work, spotted something significant. I wanted to tell you I'm proud of you. James, I know this hasn't been easy." "It hasn't," James admitted, "but it's good. Hard but good. I feel like I'm finding my way back to who I used to be, before everything went wrong." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "Can I give you some advice? Not as your boss, but as someone who's been where you are. Please, don't try to go back to who you were. You can't. None of us can after what we've seen, what we've experienced. Instead, figure out who you're becoming. Take the good parts of who you were, the discipline, the integrity, the courage, and build something new with them. You're not recovering the old James. You're creating a new one." The words hit James with unexpected force. For 3 years, he'd been mourning the loss of his old life, his old self. The idea that he could build something new, something different but equally valuable, was revolutionary. As December deepened into winter, James settled into a rhythm. Work during the day, where he was learning and growing and occasionally surprising himself with flashes of the competence he'd thought was lost forever. Evenings, he attended a veteran support group that Richard had recommended, where he connected with other men and women who understood the particular challenges of transitioning from military to civilian life. Weekends, he visited Richard's family for dinner, becoming something like an uncle to Emma and Michael, a friend to Catherine and Richard. He still had nightmares sometimes, still woke up in his apartment disoriented, expecting to see stars through a hole in a tent ceiling or to hear the sounds of the street outside a shelter. But increasingly, he woke up and remembered. He was home. He was safe. He had a chance. 3 months after starting at Crawford Security, James was given his first solo assignment, a security assessment for a small tech startup in University City. He spent a week preparing, researching the company, understanding their specific vulnerabilities, and developing a comprehensive security plan. When he presented his findings to the startup CEO, the young man was impressed enough to sign a contract for ongoing security consulting. "You just brought in your first client?" Richard told him, shaking his hand in congratulation. "That's a milestone. Celebrate it." James took himself out to dinner that night. Nothing fancy, just a decent restaurant where he could sit at a table by the window and watch the city pass by while eating food he'd ordered from a menu. It was a small victory, maybe, but it felt enormous. 6 months ago, he'd been sleeping on concrete, invisible to the world. Now he was a security consultant who just landed a client. The transformation felt impossible, miraculous. But it hadn't been a miracle. It had been choice after choice after choice. The choice to wait with that wallet in the freezing cold. The choice to show up for work every day even when it was terrifying. The choice to ask for help when he needed it. The choice to believe that he deserved a second chance. One evening in March, almost 4 months after that November morning at the bus stop, James was working late at the office, finishing a report. Richard knocked on his cubicle wall. "Got a minute?" They went to Richard's office, where he gestured for James to sit. "I wanted to talk to you about something. Catherine and I have been discussing it, and we'd like your input." "Okay," James said, curious. "We're starting a program, a formal initiative through the company to hire and train homeless veterans. Your proof of concept, James. You've shown that given the right support, someone can come back from the edge. We want to replicate that. Create a pathway for other veterans who are struggling, who just need someone to believe in them." James felt emotion tighten his throat. "Richard, I don't know what to say. We want you to help run it. You understand what they're going through better than any of us. You know what helped you, what you needed. We're thinking we could place 2 or 3 veterans a year, provide not just jobs but comprehensive support, housing assistance, mental health resources, mentorship. What do you think?" "I think it's amazing," James said honestly. "I think it could save lives, change lives, the way mine was changed." "Then let's do it," Richard said with a smile. "Let's make sure what happened to you wasn't a one-time thing. Let's make it a movement." If you've made it this far in the story, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. This story was inspired by real experiences of veterans, and your engagement helps spread awareness. Over the next 6 months, James threw himself into building the Veterans Program alongside his regular security work. He visited shelters and VA facilities, talking to homeless veterans, trying to identify those who had the desire to change their circumstances but lacked the resources. He developed training protocols, worked with local nonprofits to arrange temporary housing, created support structures that addressed not just employment but the whole person. The first veteran they brought into the program was a woman named Lisa Chun, who'd served as a combat medic in Afghanistan and had been on the streets for 18 months. James met her at a shelter in North Philadelphia, saw in her eyes the same mixture of hope and fear he'd felt that morning when Richard offered him a chance. "I don't know if I can do this," Lisa told him during their first meeting. "I've been out here for so long. I don't know if I remember how to be normal." "Normal is overrated," James told her. "What matters is showing up. One day at a time. I'll be with you every step of the way. Someone did that for me, and now I'm doing it for you." Lisa started the following Monday. James mentored her through the rough early weeks, the overwhelming adjustment period, the moments when giving up seemed easier than pushing forward. He shared his own struggles honestly, let her know she wasn't alone in finding it hard. Slowly, steadily, Lisa found her footing. By the end of her 3rd month, she was thriving, developing expertise in medical facility security that drew on her combat medic background. The second veteran was a former Army Ranger named Deshaun Williams, who'd been dealing with PTSD and substance abuse issues since leaving the service. The third was Miguel Torres, a former Navy corpsman with a traumatic brain injury from an IED explosion. Each one brought unique challenges, unique strengths. Each one required patience, support, and the belief that they deserved a second chance. And each one made it. Not without struggles, not without setbacks, but they made it. They found their footing, reclaimed their dignity, started building lives that had seemed impossible from the streets. A year after finding Richard's wallet, James was promoted to program director for the Veterans Initiative, which had been named Second Chances at his suggestion. He now supervised a small team dedicated to identifying, recruiting, training, and supporting homeless veterans. Crawford Security had hired 7 veterans through the program, and other companies in Philadelphia had taken notice, asking for advice on starting similar initiatives. James was featured in a local news story about the program. The reporter interviewed him in the office, asking about his own journey from homelessness to program director. When the segment aired, James watched himself on screen, clean, professional, articulate, and barely recognized the person he'd been just a year earlier. His ex-wife, Jennifer, saw the segment. She called him the next day, her voice tentative on the phone. "James? It's Jennifer. I saw you on the news. I wanted to say I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry." They met for coffee that weekend, the first time they'd spoken in 3 years. It was awkward at first, the weight of everything that had gone wrong between them hanging heavy in the air. But James found he wasn't angry anymore. He understood now, in ways he couldn't have before, that his problems had never been her responsibility to fix. "How's Lily?" He asked about their daughter, who was now 11. "She's good. She's in 6th grade now. Play soccer." Jennifer hesitated. "She asks about you sometimes. I've tried to explain, but it's hard at her age to understand what you went through. Could I see her?" James asked, his heart pounding. "I know I don't have rights anymore, and I'm not asking for anything official. Just, maybe we could get ice cream sometime? With you there, of course. I just want her to know I'm okay now, that I didn't forget about her." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "I'd like that. She'd like that. Let me talk to her, prepare her. But yes, James, yes." 2 weeks later, James sat across from his daughter at an ice cream shop in Manayunk. Lily was shy at first, hiding behind her mother, but gradually warmed up as James asked about school and soccer and her favorite books. He didn't try to explain everything that had happened, didn't burden her with adult complexities. He just tried to be present, to be the father she deserved to have. When they said goodbye, Lily hugged him quickly, then whispered, "I'm glad you're okay now, Daddy." James held onto those words like a lifeline. They represented something he'd thought was forever lost. The possibility of redemption in his daughter's eyes, the chance to be part of her life again, even in a limited way. As summer turned to fall, James marked the anniversary of finding Richard's wallet. A year ago, he'd been homeless, hopeless, invisible. Now he had an apartment he could afford, a job he was good at, a purpose that felt meaningful. He'd reconnected with his daughter. He was mentoring other veterans, helping them find their way back from the edge. Richard threw a small celebration at the office, ostensibly to mark the first anniversary of the Second Chances program, but really to honor James's journey. There was cake and coffee, and Richard gave a short speech about how one act of integrity had transformed not just James's life, but had created ripples that touched dozens of other lives. James showed us that character matters, Richard told the assembled staff. That the measure of a person isn't their circumstances, but their choices. He made a choice a year ago to do the right thing when he had every reason not to. And that choice changed everything for him, for this company, for every veteran we've been able to help through this program. So thank you, James, for reminding us what honor looks like. The applause was genuine, warm. James stood there, overwhelmed, thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. It hadn't been easy. There had been hard days, days when he wanted to give up, days when the old habits called to him and sobriety felt like an impossible goal. Days when the nightmares came back fierce and the past seemed more real than the present. But he'd kept showing up, keep making the next right choice and then the next one. Kept believing, even when belief was hard, that he deserved to be here, deserved the second chance. That evening, James and Richard went out for dinner, just the two of them. They ended up at a quiet restaurant in Fishtown, the kind of place where you could actually hear each other talk. Over steaks and beer, just one for James, who'd learned his limits and respected them. They reflected on the year that had passed. You ever wonder what would have happened if you'd kept the wallet? Richard asked. James considered the question seriously. Sometimes, I think about how different things would be, but I also think, if I'd kept it, I would have stayed who I was becoming on the streets. Desperate, willing to compromise my values for survival. That's a hard road to come back from. By giving it back, by choosing integrity even when it cost me something, I kept hold of who I was underneath all the mess. That made everything else possible. Richard nodded slowly. I think you're right, and I think that's what we try to teach the veterans in the program, right? That you don't rebuild your life by making easy choices. You rebuild it by making the right choices, even when they're hard. Especially when they're hard, James agreed. That's when it matters most. They talked until the restaurant closed, two veterans who'd found their way through different paths but ended up in the same place. Building something meaningful, helping others, honoring the service they'd given by continuing to serve in a different way. As James rode the bus home that night, watching the lights of Philadelphia blur past the window, he thought about purpose. For 3 years, his only purpose had been survival. Making it through another day, finding another meal, escaping another cold night. It was a purpose, but it was a narrowing one that made the world smaller and smaller until it was just him against everything else. Now his purpose was bigger. He was helping other veterans find their way back. He was proving that second chances were real, that people could change, that where you started didn't have to determine where you ended up. He was being a father to his daughter again, even in limited ways. He was part of a community, part of something larger than himself. The bus stopped near his apartment. James got off, walked the 2 blocks to his building, climbed the stairs to his studio. It wasn't much, the walls were still thin, the radiator still clanked. But it was his, a place he could call home, a place he'd earned through showing up day after day, through choosing integrity over convenience, through believing he deserved better even when the evidence suggested otherwise. He lay in bed that night, warm and safe, thinking about the path that had led him here. From the cold concrete of the bus stop to this modest bed. From desperation to hope. From invisible to seen. It had started with a simple choice to do the right thing, and that choice had opened doors he couldn't have imagined. James thought about his father, the sergeant who taught him that character was what you did when no one was watching. He hoped his father would be proud of him, for surviving, for not giving up, for remembering who he was even when the world seemed determined to make him forget. Sleep came easier now than it had in years. The nightmares are still visited sometimes, but less frequently. And when James woke from them, he could look around his apartment, remember his job and his purpose and the veterans he was helping, and ground himself in this new reality he'd built one choice at a time. In the darkness of his room, James smiled. Tomorrow he'd wake up early, like always. He'd shower and dress and take the bus to the office. He'd check in with Lisa and Deshawn and Miguel, see how they were doing, and offer support where needed. He'd work on security assessments and reports. He'd have lunch with Richard, probably talking about the program's future, about how they could help more veterans. It was a good life. Not perfect, no life was perfect, but good, meaningful, built on a foundation of integrity that could weather storms because it was rooted in truth. And it had all started with a wallet, a cold November morning, and the choice to do the right thing when no one would have blamed him for doing otherwise. Thank you so much for following James's journey. This story represents the struggles and triumphs of many veterans who face homelessness and the incredible impact one act of kindness can have. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you haven't already, subscribe to see more inspiring stories like this one.